How much do I need to spend $12,000 per month if I retire? Well, today I'm going to show you our process that we use at my firm to help hundreds of our retired clients go from a position of being stressed and uncertain about what they can spend to having a retirement strategy that can help them both maximize their return on life while also optimizing their income. And from my vantage point, I noticed the reason why people can sometimes run into issues of stress and uncertainty of what they can actually spend is because the traditional rules of retirement are outdated and they no longer apply. The way that traditional planning has evolved so far has led people to believe that you need to get a high-paying job, work hard through endless hours, and then retire in your late 60s or 70s and live out your so-called golden years. But there's nothing worse than thinking you're fully prepared only to realize that you approached it the wrong way. You save and you think you arrive, but there's one aspect of traditional retirement planning that could be leading you astray, and that is only focusing on saving up a big pot full of money. But I'm going to show you why that is an incomplete picture, and there's a better approach that you should be aware of so that you can confidently spend what you need to in order to enjoy that next chapter of your life. So let's see in real dollars why someone trying to figure out if they can spend $12,000 a month might come to the false conclusion that they don't have enough money. So let's say Mike and Carrie came to me and said they need about $12,000 per month to both retire at age 55. Now, the first question that most people naturally will ask, because we've sort of been programmed this way, is how much do they need in a portfolio to cover that, and what withdrawal rate should they be thinking about? Well, traditional planning will say, okay, you need $12,000 per month, so $144,000 per year. If you divide that by 4%, which is a commonly accepted safe withdrawal rate, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, that would lead you to think you need about $3.6 million saved for retirement. Now, unfortunately, this is where most people stop and say, well, hey, I don't have $3.6 million. I know Social Security won't kick in for another maybe 8 to 10 years if you retire early. So they just work longer. They keep on saving, and they come to the point where they finally arrived and they weren't aware that they were actually in a position to do what they wanted to years ago, but they just didn't go deep enough. So what is the better approach? And there are just two simple questions that you can ask yourself just to take this a little bit deeper. And most people are surprised by how much this can impact your ability to retire early. So we need to ask the questions, what other source of income will be there for Mike and Carrie in retirement? Also, do they have expenses that will eventually go away? And it turns out, like most people, Mike will have Social Security of around $3,700 per month at full retirement age, and then Carrie will get about half of that as a spousal benefit. And yes, they need to spend $12,000 per month after tax, but that's not going to be forever. And about 10 years from now, their mortgage payment of around $2,600 per month will completely go away. So just by asking those two simple questions, the shortfall that we eventually need to be met by the portfolio goes from $12,000 per month, knowing that in the future, they will need to spend about $5,000 per month from the portfolio. So at that point in their lives where they need to spend about $54,000 per year, the math of $54,000 divided by a simple 4% means approximate balance of around $1.3 million. Of course, this is just a high level picture. I'm going to show you why there's a lot missing to that. For example, most people miss that you have to adjust upward for taxes when we're just using a 4% rule. But you now understand that for those that want to retire early, it comes down to how can you bridge that gap for Social Security or maybe Medicare? And how do you make sure you have wiggle room so that you're not married to a monthly number? You can take more trips, purchase more things, you have more flexibility in your plan. Now, hopefully you can start to see that affording a monthly spend of $12,000 a month doesn't just come down to saving $2 million or $3 million or $4 million in a portfolio. You can start to see that a portfolio is actually just more of a tool to supplement what you need to spend. But that raises an even more important question when the rubber meets the road and we go beyond the hypothetical and what I just showed you on the whiteboard. How do we create a dynamic income strategy that not only considers maybe expenses going away or other income sources, but also we're more precise on taxes, longevity, and investing differently? So to explain to you how we solve for this issue, I'm going to go back to our friend Mike and Carrie to help you understand how we actually help clients answer the question of how can they sustainably afford a $12,000 per month retirement, and you're going to see why we need to go deeper. So before I showed you why Mike and Carrie don't need $3.6 million to retire early and how adding in just a few of those tweaks made a big difference for them to be able to spend about $12,000 per month from their portfolio. So let's back it up. Again, they're both age 55. Let's assume they have about $3 million saved. So over $600,000 less than what the 4% rule would suggest. But of that, and this is really important, they have about $2 million in tax deferred, $800,000 in taxable, and they have about $200,000 in Roth, so tax-free accounts. Now, this makes a huge difference because we can't just ignore taxes and RMDs in the future, because that's a huge factor for those of you that have tax deferred accounts with your strategy. And of course, everyone's different. This is why we do custom strategies for folks, but you start to see a little bit of a different picture. But to understand how this all works together, let's take a 10,000 foot view of their retirement income over their lifetime. And if you look closely, you can see that if they retire in 2025, as far as retirement income goes, they can actually spend more than $12,000 a month based on their situation with a $3 million portfolio. In fact, they can likely spend up to $1,000 more per month. And we're going to talk about why that is later. But now you can see it visually in action. We can see that in those first 10 years or so, they're going to be heavily relying on their portfolio. We can see this cliff right here when we need to drop portfolio withdrawals because our mortgage payments go away. And then finally in 2036, Social Security kicks in for them. And that shortfall is now dropped really significantly. Now, if you're quick with math, you'll realize that starting with $13,000 per month as far as a withdrawal rate is about 5.2% based on their portfolio. Now, why is that acceptable? Well, there are a few reasons. Number one, of course, we talked about all the Social Security and income changing over time. But also number two, they follow a dynamic withdrawal strategy. So we've been talking about withdrawal rates. Let me share this chart as to why withdrawal rates aren't something to base your entire retirement strategy on. And this is a chart from Income Lab. It basically shows historically sustainable withdrawal rates are actually rarely below 5%. All these ups and downs are what were considered sustainable at different times depending on when you're taking income. In fact, the only time it would dip below this gray line would be during the 60s, which was the worst time to retire. And if we zoom in on this, we can see that in 65 and 66, where we're hitting this gray line, what that shows is that the 4% rule, at least historically, is a little bit too conservative. But of course, history is 20/20 in hindsight. This is the problem with factoring in a perfect withdrawal rate when we don't know the future. It's fine knowing what I would have done in the past, but the key when answering this question is being able to make adjustments. Now, I wouldn't start with something like 11% withdrawal rate, even though during periods that was acceptable. But if we go back to 1986 and we start with a 4.3% withdrawal rate, as long as you had a plan that could tap you on the shoulder and tell you when to adjust, we'd see that we can rapidly increase income over time. And then in hindsight, we look back and we say, actually 4.3% was a little bit too low. But if they started there, you can see how if you retire in a great market, you can get increases over time. So these adjustments are a huge deal for Mike and Carrie. That means based on their starting balance, age, and the way they're invested, we can realistically start spending up to $13,000 per month. But if the portfolio were to go up, we can start to increase income. However, if the portfolio balance were to drop by a certain percentage, we would want to start to pull back until things get better. But can we invest better for an early retirement? Because we need to have the right investment strategy that can reliably produce income and grow your portfolio to fight inflation over the next 3 to 4 decades. We also don't want to be too risky, because we've all heard of people that blow up their retirement because they use the same strategy for the retirement that they did for their working years. But first, I want to talk about the wrong way to choose an allocation for an early retirement. What most people get wrong about asset allocation is they'll say, hey, here's your age. They'll factor in a risk tolerance, and then they'll slap a portfolio on you like 60-40 or 50-50. Now, when we build a portfolio, we want to actually follow what your life is going to look like. Now, a lot of people, they come to say, Matt, I want to retire at 55 or I want to retire at 60. And I look at that portfolio and sometimes it's 100% stocks. And that's not a problem at this point because they haven't retired yet. But oftentimes I'll see a significant portion that might be heavily concentrated. And the fact of the matter is, maybe the stock had probably done really well for them. And when we start to unravel these things, they start to realize that the last 20 to 30 years of investing that made them successful will not be the same things that make them successful over the next 30 years. The math changes where it's not just about investment returns, it's about tax saving returns and a tax efficient withdrawal strategy. So when I'm building a retirement portfolio and I'm looking at someone like Mike and Carrie, what that tells me is they need about $144,000 per year in income, at least until Social Security or their expenses change, and we need to adjust that for inflation over their lifetimes. And also what that tells me is that we need to have enough income set aside in a safer bucket so when, not if, markets have a correction during a 30 to 40 year retirement, they don't have to worry about it. So in reality, what I like to do is have a minimum amount of funds set aside that could be anywhere from 4 to 8 years of income, depending on what we agree upon, in the account that we're going to take income from first, which in their case is likely going to be their brokerage account. And then perhaps focus on long-term growth in their tax-deferred accounts because we might not be taking money out of there for the next 10 years. And then secondly, our approach, and I can't give exact investment recommendations here, but our approach is to put together a globally diversified portfolio in retirement because we never know which markets will outperform during the course of your retirement. So we build a portfolio to optimize for capturing multiple return streams. Just to give you a quick example, the S&P 500 was actually one of the worst performers in the 2000s. If you're solely living off the S&P, you would have had to cut back or go back to work because your portfolio would have had negative returns over that 10-year period. And if Mike and Carrie were taking large withdrawals, that would really affect them if they were too concentrated. So by building a portfolio that is diversified, we can start to take all the guesswork out of things. So the last step is to test this level of spending historically based on their portfolio, having the right mix, based off the withdrawal strategy, and see if they did decide to spend an extra $1,000 per month, how would that have played out for them historically? So to help put some context around Mike and Carrie spending around $13,000 per month, here's a little chart showing how much someone could have withdrawn from a similarly invested portfolio if they had begun this retirement plan at any point in the last 130 years and experienced those historical returns and inflation. You'll notice that our recommendation as far as a withdrawal level would have survived the returns and inflation experienced even during the Great Depression without the need for a reduction in spending. In fact, other than just a small brief period here in the early 1900s, this withdrawal level is below all historical sustainable spending levels. Though the future could of course look different than the past, we believe that this means for Mike and Carrie, their spending is comparatively conservative. Now we shaded the light blue periods where the stock valuations were closest to what we find today. And as you'll see, for the most part, the returns and inflation experienced in those periods tend to support higher levels of portfolio withdrawals. So our strategy, again, comparatively is more balanced. We have a plan to adjust so that we are cautious with withdrawals early on in retirement. This is why we set up a strategy to monitor on a monthly basis to adjust up or down if needed. Now, these are just a few pieces that I shared for seeing how much a retiree can afford to spend. Everyone has a unique plan and things change. That's why we don't want to just run off a withdrawal rate strategy and set it and forget it. We have a withdrawal strategy that is robust through bad markets. You have an optimal investment strategy to help you to continue to buy the things you want to buy, and you are prepared for whatever markets throw at you. And that is ultimately how you start to figure out how much you can confidently spend on a monthly basis. Again, this is Matt Calcagno. I'm a certified financial planner and advisor at One Degree Advisors. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that subscribe button as well as commenting down below with anything you want to see in the future from me. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys on the next one.